everyone, to another episode of HR and Payroll 2.0. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks so much, Pete. Just back from a conference. We'll talk about it at a later time, but
Yes.
excited to be here.
Yeah, welcome. It is, yes, a special episode. We have guests this week, and I'm so excited about. I can't wait to talk about this. We have Ciaran Strachan from the Australian Workforce Compliance Council. He's the managing director and CEO, and he and I got connected over the payroll profession confidence survey, and I'm so excited about what they're doing. I had to have him on. So, welcome, Ciaran. Great to have you.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Julie. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, likewise. It's so cool to have you. Look, I want to start off with our question we ask all of our guests. Julie, you love this one.
Yes.
How did you land in the world of payroll, Ciaran, and what in the world keeps you here?
Well, actually, I'll be a little bit of an anomaly, Pete and Julie. I actually joined the Air Force to do payroll. So,
Wow. Me,
Wow.
hey,
one of those.
hey,
Number one. First one.
look at that. Look at that. I was in the Marines and worked in the HR data and payroll as well. So
There you go.
it's
There you
two
go.
of us.
So, I think I'm a statistical
Yeah,
anomaly. I'm one of those people that actually joined to do it
that's so
as a
cool.
profession. And then, funny enough, right after I joined to do payroll, they got rid of payroll in the Air Force. So,
Oh, of course, right?
so you still did it, but you didn't officially exist.
Oh, that's
You know,
great.
it's a common tragic story. And then from there, around 2005, I left. Still stayed in defence, got into fraud control. So that's the Australian Department of Defence, of course, and then left
Yeah.
that and worked private sector for 10 years. Naturally gravitating towards the initiative that I've been working on for 4 years now, and we went public within October last year.
Yeah. Wow. Well, congrats. That's amazing. Thank you for your service too, by the way. I think that's, it was a great part of my career and starting it in the HR world, which I didn't know I was doing in a shared service center in the Marine Corps, auditing pay entitlement records that affected payroll. I never thought it would take me where I am. So, hey, it's cool to meet another person like that.
Yeah,
Very
and you
cool.
too, Pete. I think one of the best things that I think Australia is slowly picking up from US servicemen and women is to thank their servicemen and women. So thank you for
Yeah.
your service as well.
Not
Yeah.
enough of that going around for
I
sure.
know. We need to take care of our
Well,
veterans
this
for
might be
sure.
our two peas in a pod
I
episode.
know, right? This is so cool. This is so cool. So look, I want to jump into the AWCC. Because
Yep.
I got to be honest with you, I was completely blind to you guys. I did not know what you were doing, and payroll brought us together. Here we are. But tell me about the Australian Workforce Compliance Council. Say that 3 times fast. Tell me about it. And you told me before the show there's a story about the origin of the name. So I want to hear that too. But tell me what you guys do and how it came about.
Yeah, certainly. Perhaps I might just start with the origin of the name because it kind of tells the story and where we are and what we do now.
Mhm.
So AWCC, once you say that 10 times, you get the acronym down pat, AWCC. Everyone on the board, we even practiced the name when we finalised it on the board. We went through about 4 or 5 different iterations. And like a lot of the initiatives that we'll be releasing over the next 2 years, the name was the last thing we came up with. We kind of started with what is it we're trying to do? What's the framework we need to enable it, and how do we execute it was kind of the methodology we came up with during our research, and it adapted and evolved and changed the name itself. So there's 2 parts to the name. There's the obvious Australian, so we'll just drop that off because obviously we want to kind of denote where we sit in the world. The next part is workforce compliance. Now, how we came up with that was the initiative, and it's one of the capabilities that we're putting out. Was we realised that the whole challenge we have in Australia in and around how we pay people and the legal instruments behind that is it's an unsupported framework. So what I mean by that is when it was the latest iteration was done in 2010, which was huge, and we can talk about that later when we get to the complexity of what payroll does in Australia. Uh, it was unsupported, as in there was no professional framework or standards or guidance implemented by all of 9 governments in Australia that participated in that made it a federal scheme. So the other thing we then did too is we went, what are our opposition, or what's our competition? So accountants, HR, and lawyers are our 3 primary um, competitors. In the description that we have when we did our analysis on what they're doing versus what payroll does is that they have what we call partitioned into payroll. So partitioning, think an example I use is Napoleon during his expansion wars. Poland didn't exist on a map, but it was still there. You still had Polish people that were still around.
Right.
They still spoke Polish. That's currently payroll
Yeah.
in Australia for many different reasons. So we went, well, what can we do to establish the primary focus of what payroll does? and we went workforce compliance. That's the generic banner that we want to put it under, and sit it in the C-suite. So all
Yeah.
C-suites have a risk management framework. We went, how do we carve out a section there for people legislation compliance? And we haven't started with terms like, what do we call it, people compliance? Well, problem with that was that you gravitate towards very quickly to work health and safety. What if we call it workplace compliance? Well, again, goes to work health and safety. Workforce is more generic, and under that we'll have subsets including safety compliance and of course payroll compliance. So that was how we came up with the name Workforce Compliance. We were terrific, we've got a great name, and it was just originally called Workforce Compliance Australia. And then we realised that it's one thing to come up with a set of standards, but it's another thing to execute them. we need a workforce, and we went,
Yeah.
oh yeah, okay, it's going to have to be payroll. And that's when we found a lot of, and I kind of went back into payroll. So as a lot of payroll people do, you're told that payroll's not a job or a profession. You should become an accountant or HR. Well, that was me. I
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
a HR. Sorry, I partly did an accounting degree. Realised that that's not payroll.
Yeah.
I've got two HR degrees now, actually, both postgraduate, including industrial relations. I realised again that's not payroll, and landed into, okay, well, now we need to create an association for payroll, because we technically don't have one in Australia until we were created, and we can talk more about what that actually is in the eyes of the government later. And then we went, well, we need to bring this other industry along that's just as heavily involved, and 90% of the issues are overlapped, which is employ tech. And that's the term we've created, and government's agreed with that. So employ tech is any kind of software that sits in and around executing payroll. So
Yes. Okay.
to save on bureaucracy, we're standing them up as divisions, but for all intents and purposes, they're their own associations. They have their own purpose, their own vision, so on and so forth. And then the third one will stand up will be the standards division, of course, and then anything else to help execute that
Yeah.
along
So
the way. So that's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a lot. Wow. I mean, that's amazing. So are you saying then that the AWCC was fundamentally formed around and for payroll? Then is that what you're
that's
saying?
that's that's where we centered around.
Yeah.
And the research, of course, all started, and you would have heard some international waves recently with our Labor government getting in. So for US
Yeah.
viewers and anyone else that's not Australian, our Labor government is like your Democrats. So they just came back in after being out for 10 years, and they're catching up on all the workers types reforms that they've been wanting to do for the past 10 years. Now,
Yeah.
in that, they've criminalised wage theft. So, of course,
Oh,
for those who
yeah.
don't know the history behind wage theft, we actually adopted it from a US union movement.
Yep.
The
I heard
Australian
about this.
unions, got into it around 2007. We're defining in our risk management framework for the C-suite that we'll be working on over the next couple of months as wage fraud, and then we're categorising that into other sub-risk categories, which payroll I think will love, including underpayments, overpayments, and maladministration. And we're going to be using, and an association that I love is ACFI, the Certified Fraud Examiners Association that's based out of the US, of course. We're going to be utilising a similar risk management framework for that, and pulling in multiple data sources. So
Yeah.
the idea behind that is, it's one thing to create these professions formally like payroll, but how do you empower them? And that's what the standards framework's designed to
Yeah.
do, certification, all these other great things we're going to work on over the
Yeah.
next couple of years.
So are you the founder as well? I mean, is this all your brainchild, or did you have a did you have a team, or how
I
did?
definitely had a
Yeah.
We definitely had a team. I guess it started with me, and then
Yeah.
I kind of like the mafia. I pulled other people in, and now they're stuck. So
They can't get out.
so
Yeah.
that's right.
That's
But
payroll.
everyone's in.
That's payroll.
That's
Yeah,
right.
It pulls me back in. Yeah.
The Australian payroll
exactly.
mafia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Like,
this is so amazing though. I mean certainly the payroll needs this around the world, right? There's just not been this progress of focus, I guess. And I want to get into
yeah.
more, cuz I know some of the things that you guys are doing, but like talk to me a little bit about like what makes payroll unique in Australia, because I have to be honest with you, my perception of Australian payroll is that it's a bit more forward in terms of digital practices than say some of the other countries. I think you guys have had some mandates that have expedited that a little bit. Or do you still feel you guys are a little behind maybe other countries? And what's the challenge primarily?
That's a huge question that we could do a whole episode on. So I'll be as brief as I can, because
Yeah.
when you initially floated that with me a couple of weeks ago, I thought, oh, okay, what I need to do is go and look at the US market and some of the other international markets. And
Yeah.
perhaps the best way I can answer your question is focus on our points of difference. So this is how deep and dark my research went. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, and all your listeners, but the founding of Australia with our initial 6 colonies was a result of the US um, American Revolution. You
I
might
did
not be
not know
aware of that.
that. I did not know that.
Guarantee no one knows that.
I did not know that. Oh,
So what happened then was after the American Revolution was the English government said, well, let's land and expand. I'm going to use a consulting term here
yeah.
with other known countries around, but we won't do any deals with natives, and we're just going to go straight in, take over, and set up colonies. Now, around about the mid 1830s to 50s was, of course, the start of the Industrial Revolution, and in a modern context, that's where payroll comes from, and Australia is no different. What happened basically in trying to squeeze in nearly 200 years of history between the 1850s to now is we had a much stronger Labor or Democrat equivalent type presence in our colonies.
hmm
So we had 8 colonies originally, and 6 opted in to form Australia. The 2 that didn't was New Zealand and Papua New Guinea. They decided to shave off and become their own countries. And then we stood up a couple of territories. So now we have 9 governments, 1 federal, 2 territories, which is the
Oh,
ACT-NT,
interesting.
and 6 colonies. And that federation happened in 1901. Now, unlike the tax system went federal in World War II because we had to fund a war, and about a quarter of our men at the time were in uniform one way
Mm,
or another.
interesting.
That never happened with the workplace relations or industrial relations side of the house. You had state-based or former colonial agreements right up until a whole bunch of consolidation happened around the 90s, and then further consolidation under our Liberal governments from 96 to 2009, which was, so our Liberals like your Republican type party, so they're right wing. And then the nearly 4,000 state-based modern, what they call awards, so how you pay people or rates of pay, got rolled up. So there was 97% reduction to 122 what they call modern awards in 2010. So that was the first time the whole lot got chucked together. And then just to give a good point of comparison, what also got brought into that was an arbitration scheme for anyone that's unfairly dismissed. So as you no doubt are aware, and I subscribe to a couple of US lawyers, employment lawyers, it's typical, I think the stat's about 33% of US employment agreements have an arbitration clause. So for those
Mm,
who don't know what
yep.
arbitration is, it's simply an appointed third-party dispute person. But of course, if your employer is paying for that,
Yeah.
you can't expect generally a fair representation, and the
yeah.
stats back that up. Well, in Australia, we don't have that.
Mm,
It's a federally government run system, also brought under the same thing. So to answer your question, Pete, what I would say is that as a result of a very heavy left presence of industrial relations, we have more workers' rights, a pretty expansive safety net, and of course, what comes with that is more law and in turn regulation.
oh,
So
yeah.
until you understand that context, it can be very easy to look at Australia and go, wow, you've got a lot of stuff here that makes payroll hard. Well, I don't kind of go the other way and say, well, we actually have a lot of labour laws that need to be operationalised.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Interesting.
what we're actually trying to do, and this is where AWCC comes into it, is that system, when it was brought in by so the prime minister we had at the time. We had 2 Labor prime ministers. Start off with Kevin Rudd, but then we went on to Julian Gillard. Now Julia Gillard brought this in, and she's an ex-class action litigation lawyer. So this whole framework was brought in and went as far as lawyers, and it's what we call a tripartite system. So it's government, left and right, and that's it. Whereas opposed to, you go to the Australian Taxation Office, and remember, it's a much older, grander institution because that was federalised around World War II. They also have operational, or what we call professional, peak bodies come to the party, and they build trust with them and work on behind the scenes, which we already have a great director by the name of Deanne Windsor. She's representing us on one of those committees there right now. And the relationship is very different. So what that portfolio does is they don't just simply arbitrate between unions and employer groups, which is how the Fair Work system is set up. They also pull in the operational peak bodies, so all the accounting bodies, the law bodies, as well as the Institute of Company Directors, the directors' bodies, and say, how do we operationalise this policy? Is there anything else we should consider? The Fair Work side doesn't do that, and that's what we're basically trying to fix with our initiative.
Yeah, that's fantastic, man. I mean, that's a lot of complexity, right? I mean, at least it sounds complex. Julie, I don't know how much Australia payroll you've done, but it's a lot of nuances there that make it very very navigationally complicated, right? And I think that, but my understanding is that you guys are really forward with your tech, though. Is that and the digitization of how you communicate payroll to the government? Is that true? Am I wrong about that?
Hi there. I'm Peter Zollman. I'm a co-host of the Inside Job Boards and Recruitment Marketplaces podcast.
And I'm Stephen Rothberg, and I guess that makes me the other co-host.
Every other week, we're joined by guests from the world's leading job sites.
Together, we analyze news about general, niche, and aggregator job board and recruitment marketplaces sites.
Make sure you sign up and subscribe today.
Yeah, there's been a lot of very good initiatives that have come up recently, and
I think you're a bit ahead of a lot of the other countries in that way.
Yeah, I think we're quite lucky that we've got reciprocal government departments that are open to working with industry. So,
Yeah.
for instance, the Fair Work Commission, which is they have the delegation from the federal government to very modern awards. That's those 122 awards. Now, that's
Yeah.
something we're involved with right now. The first time ever that a non-left or right group's been involved, and we're in there actively changing things right now, thanks to, again, another director called Jen McKinney. She's done a terrific job in there in the past couple of weeks. Now, the Fair Work Commission has a back-end, what we call API, which helps tech integrate and update those awards. I'm probably butchering exactly what it does here, and tech guys are probably spazzing out right now while I butcher what they're doing. The Treasury also has something, other various initiatives as well, and they have consultation groups that help. But the tech side, I mean, you can have, so for Australia has about 13.5 million employees that support the entire economy of about 25 million people. And 43% of those employees are serviced, have what we call small to micro businesses, and have around about a mean average of 9 employees. Well, that market in its entirety was created in and around payroll, and the calculators that sit on the side of that, including shift time and attendance systems and so on, all from 2012.
Yeah.
And that market's growing exponentially, and we have unicorns now, and some of them are pushed into the US and internationally.
Yeah.
I think it's totally fascinating, and the role of the government, is just, I think, definitely unique. I'm sure it makes things complex. What I think I hear most around Australian payroll has to do with the superannuation, which is just an operational complexity. But what I think is really interesting is that none of all of this movement and all of the activity that's happening in Australia has garnered the same attention as like Brazil's e-social. And maybe that's because Brazil's e-social has been, like difficult, not easily implemented. And it seems like, it feels to me like this is all flying a little bit under the, the news radar and stuff, because it's, and maybe it's that smooth, right?
Well, some of the initiatives, and that's a very good point, Julie. I think, not until you start looking around internationally, you realise we are in some regards ahead of the game. For instance, Deanne worked heavily on something called single touch payroll. Now, single touch payroll, she would be the best person to speak about it, but basically that was a initiative with industry and the Australian Taxation Office to measure what we call the tax gap. In addition to, it does several other things too, but it ensures that everyone's taxation is measured accordingly. And it was so highly effective that the ATO leased out their head guy, so the Australian Tax Office leased out their head guy to implement the same thing in Canada right now. And of course, if you start looking at the tax gap, that means you can then start to estimate what is the underpayment gap, what is potentially people not being paid that they should be paid, and are they even employed correctly classified. So with the whole wage theft argument in Australia, it's been heavily focused on cases, class action litigation. Of course, we've got a terrific regulator here called the Fair Work Ombudsman, and their annual reports where they've been going after the big businesses, so the top 10 ASX listed entities through to your bottom ones. However, what's gone under the radar is the impact that single touch payroll had on that by working out labour hire companies were incorrectly classifying contractors and so on and so forth. So there's been so many different angles from so many different departments that, yes, it's definitely challenging to keep up. What I'll just say on the complex thing here, we had to work out certain terminology that we want the payroll profession to start utilising. One is we don't want to go into the trap of using the term complex. The reason being is in Australia, the term complex is a poison chalice. And that's because it was politicised a few years ago with the former coalition government, where they tried to basically undermine the entire Fair Work system, so 150 years of industrial relations framework, to push through a high court case that went through. And the whole political narrative was the system's too complex. Now, what we've decided to do instead was take a fresh look at what payroll does, compare it with other professions, and what we project instead is that it's a highly sophisticated profession, right? So what I'd encourage payroll to do is start looking at that, looking at what you do, compare it to lawyers and accountants. We've actually found that when we combine 5 degrees, under and postgraduate, from lawyers and accountants, payroll operationalizes all of those combined, and there's still gaps. So it's the most sophisticated profession working in this space, is what I would love to hear from everyone.
Yeah, I love that too, and I'm glad you kind of came to that point, because I want to talk about just this concept that payroll has been so less than for so long, less than in so many ways, right? In the way it's viewed, in the way it's treated, and I know you guys are fighting to make this an official profession, and I don't know if anybody in any country is doing that. I know there's been some work by the UK to do some things around degree programs, which I know you guys are aiming to do as well. But just making it a profession and recognizing it, like you're saying, on par with a certified professional, right? A lawyer, a CPA, something like that. There's kind of straddling a little bit of both of those worlds. And so I love that. So tell us about that. I'd love to hear what you guys are kind of envisioning and how you're going to get there to that. Like, how do you do it?
Yeah, certainly. So we worked out the map last year and even the costings on how to do it.
Yeah.
So generally, this is the way degrees work in Australia, and we're based on an international agreement. So even some of how I'm going to structure what we're doing here is the way Scotland does it, Ireland does it, parts of England. I'm not too sure about the US, but so on. So generally, you have an undergraduate degree, and then you have a postgraduate degree. Now in Australia, an undergraduate degrry is what we call an industry preparation degree. So if you want to become a lawyer or a top, what we call a skill level 1 profession, generally you go and do your undergraduate degree. Doesn't mean you're actually technically qualified to do your job. Just means you've done a condensed industry degree. And there's 2 types. There's what we call an associate degree, and then you've got a bachelor's degree. Now, the associate degree is just a part of a bachelor's, of what we call nested. Then, for you to actually become qualified in your profession, including a specialisation, that's your postgraduate degree. Now, I know, because I looked at a lot of them in the US and how they do their certifications, and they're a great cheaper alternative run by associations rather than your postgraduate framework. In Australia, they're generally one and the same. So, for instance, CPA Australia, it is a 6-unit postgraduate certification, but it is ranked as the same level as a master's degree, right? So if you want to go do your MBA, you can RPL in those 6 units. If you want to become a chartered accountant in Australia, none of them write their quals, because to become a CA, you've got to have 2 degrees. So you've got to have your undergraduate degree that they approve. So it can't just be any undergraduate degree. It's got to be university endorsed Bachelor's of Commerce. And then you do there, as a part of the certification, you do their graduate diploma in chartered accounting. So it's embedded in a part of that certification. Now, associations in Australia can register with a regulator called TICSA. And TICSA is the regulator for all universities in Australia. So what we found is the top certifications that have legal instruments behind them all register their own institutes and design their own degree. So we reached that conclusion, worked out what the cost is, worked out the funding model, and then we're going to go out to market and ask for everyone to donate. And we're going to create what's called a grad dip in labour law with 3 specialisations. So a grad dip is 2/3 of a master's degree. So in Australia, a master's degree is 12 units, and then it has what we call 2 nested degrees. So think like Russian dolls, right? So your grad dip is 8 of those 12 units, and a grad cert is 4 of those 12 units. So typically you have what you call your capstone unit around the 8th unit that brings it all together. So what we've agreed to do is the first 4 units will be exactly the same for all 3 streams. The second 4 units will be designed for each stream. So the 3 qualifications we're looking at, the first one's payroll. So the first 4 units will be a grade cert in labour law. We'll cover industrial relations, which is the biggest capability gap I see right now for payroll, or probably biggest of 2. They just don't understand a lot of, for instance, what I talked about in the first part of your segment here, the history, the importance, the left and right, the political aspects, what does the Fair Work Commission do versus the Fair Work Ombudsman, and so on and so forth. Then the next one will just be federal law units versus state. So whilst we had this amalgamation, like I said, in 2010, we also had a lot of legal instruments that didn't federalise, and the biggest one, of course, is long service leave. So, Julie, where you stated earlier that taxation and superannuation pose a lot of challenges for payroll interpret, when we do a survey, their biggest headache is always long service leave, because you've got a different one in every state and territory. Now, so payroll in its second part will then go into taxation, super, and so on. The other stream we're actually going to do for lawyers. The reason being is there's
Oh,
only
nice.
three.
Yeah.
There's only three postgraduate degrees in Australia for labour lawyers, and they're in Metro, Sydney, and Melbourne only. And now those law societies have certifications, and only those law societies. So although we have a total of 18 law societies and state bars, only three of them have a certification for a workplace relations or industrial relations specialist. Depends. So Victoria calls it, the Law Institute of Victoria calls it a workplace relations specialist. New South Wales, which is the biggest state of all, it's about 33% of the economies in New South Wales, calls it industrial relations, so on. So we went to them, looked at theirs, and said, well, what if we create a grade cert component? Would you accredit? And they said, yeah, would love to. We went to those three unis. They all said, no, we're not going online. So we're like, okay, terrific. Good luck if you're a lawyer outside of Metro Sydney or Melbourne. So why don't we just create another 4 units? And then that way we have the lawyers and payroll sitting in the first half together. So they're realizing that payroll is and this is the new definition we're going to have for payroll. It's operational application of labour and related legislation. So they're operational labour law and other law experts.
I love
And
that. I love that.
that is I'm glad
I need
you
an
do.
applause button for that. That's a great one. I love it.
I'm glad you do,
Yeah.
because that is a significant point of difference. And Jen
It
can
is.
attest to that with the modern awards reviews she's been going through right now, where she's up against labour lawyers, right? Long-term labour lawyers working for unions and employer groups, and it's fascinating reading the transcripts because you can see their arguments drop off very quickly because she has operational context and she has wider legal understanding, right? So the third one we're going to have too is industrial relations practitioners. So they're people that do unfair dismissal and just work in and around EAs and so on. And those units are out there, but they're just not consolidated into workplace investigations, which has a lower burden of proof because it's civil, it's not criminal. And mediation and conciliation, there's actually a unit that the Fair Work Commission gets its conciliators to do. So we're just going to put that unit in there. So that's it. So that's what we're going to do. It'll be online. And the great thing about an association is because we're a legally structured non-for-profit, on average, we charge about 40% of a university degree.
Yeah.
So it's
Wow.
significantly cheaper.
Wow, interesting. This is really fascinating. I think it's such a great step in the right direction for the. I mean, just having a structure and something, a career path and a guide and like or not even a career path, I guess, an education path to a career, and something on the level. I love the wording you guys used around the competent and regulated operational labor law experts instead of payroll, right?
Yeah, that's it. And that's
Or
exactly when you
the
look
role
at
definition. I mean, the role definition, maybe not the name, but yeah,
And how we came up with that was, what do they actually do?
yeah,
And there's some pictorial formats we can show you. They're in
yeah.
our research. And just to go back to your earlier point about a structured career, that's the first thing that I wanted to tackle. Was we need a graduate pipeline. We need to be able to compete
Yes.
with lawyers and accountants. Why should they
Yeah.
go through and do their university degrees and then suddenly fall into payroll?
Exactly. And that's
Right.
one of the top answers we get to that question we asked you in the beginning is, and no offense, I love it that we all kind of found our way to payroll and fell into it and fell in love with it, hopefully. But we shouldn't be attracting people by accident. We should be attracting the best and the brightest who are like, hey, this is a great career path. Look what this can be. There's respect here. Right now, there's no respect for it, right? Although it's holding up the building in a lot of ways. And so I love that you're bringing, at least some credibility to this, education to this, and actually a path where someone, I had a discussion with a Big Four consulting partner who said, how do you recruit for payroll today? How do you convince a college kid to come be in payroll? Right. And I don't know how you do that. Right. How do we ever do it? I guess we fell into it. So,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I want to raise both of my hands and say, I know, Ciaran, you mentioned that you have some graphics. Like, I really love. I want to see the infographic that kind of puts all of these pieces together and shows, what that looks like and what those kind of pathings are. And I'm also, I just can't help but think, as you start to talk about all of the knowledge that's necessary, and we know as payroll lovers of payroll that there's a lot to be said for the compliance and so forth. I can't help but think, payroll has been treated as a very administrative role forever and not the highest paid administrative role, right? And when you start to show what all is involved and what types of knowledge are required to really do this profession well, and you're tying it to lawyers and accountants, you got to believe that at some point in time that will start to have an impact on the pay in the profession.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If I can come back to you, Julie, with both of your points. So you can look at that diagram right now. It's on our website, and if you go
cool.
to surveys, it's in the survey, which was our initial submission to the government to get, and we actually got payroll manager created. But we couldn't rescue payroll itself out. We got its name changed from clerk to officer, but it's still technically considered a specialisation of bookkeeping, which is a low-skilled trade. So all you got to do is go to our website, go to surveys, and you'll see one on there called ANZSCO, ANZSCO, payroll survey, and you'll see submissions. And the survey itself is just all infographic, and you'll see a great diagram there. I can't remember which page it is, but it's all circles.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see where I've got one with off to the left, it shows what accountants study and what legislation they operationalise, and then off to the top right, it's got what a tax lawyer does, and off to the off to the right bottom, what a labour lawyer does, because they're not allowed to swim in each other's lane. They're only allowed to do one or the other.
I don't know about you, but I don't know very many people that are hopeful about the world of work. And I'd like to change that. My name's Marcus Mossberger, and I started the Hope at Work podcast, where you'll find two things. Number one, really interesting guests, and number two, innovative ideas about the future of work. Check it out.
Before we move on, I need to let you know about my friend Mark Pfeffer and his show, People Tech. If you're looking for the latest on product development, marketing, funding, big deals happening in talent acquisition, HR, HCM, that's the show you need to listen to. Go to the Work Defined Network, search up People Tech, Mark Pfeffer. You can find him anywhere.
And then you've got payroll, big bat circle over the whole lot.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah,
I love it.
And
I love it.
That made our case so much easier. Apparently, just showing that one picture.
That's beautiful. I will make sure that we put this into the links so people can grab that and see that, and I'll try to share it as well after this before the episode comes out to make sure people know we recorded it. But so one of the things I want to ask you, Ciaran, and this caught my eye when I saw this when we were trading notes about what you guys are doing. You mentioned that your goal is also to work with payroll practitioners and the government jointly to develop system configuration standards. Tell me what that means, and what do you envision? And do you see wanting or needing to engage some of the major players in the industry that develop some of these solutions, especially in your country?
Yeah, definitely. So when we did our research as to what were the capability gaps in the country, so what was the supporting framework that we need to operationalise Fair Work, and of course the other, so we call it the 9 governments framework. So the Fair Work is the federal one, the other 8 is the other 8 states and territories, long service leave being one, but there's also other instruments that didn't come up with it. That's where we came down to, we need the practitioner, which is payroll, and we need the employ tech. So that'll be another division, has its own president, which will be Deanne Windsor. And think industry lobbying body, but we're not doing the lobby. We're doing the representation on both the formulation with government as well as the liaison. Now, what government loves is, can we just have one point of contact rather than dealing with, say, for instance, I've heard a couple of times that the Australian Taxation Office has 400 registered products for payroll taxation. Now, so what we'll do is we'll go out to market, and everyone that's in the employ tech field can join. So employ tech is just anything in and around both HR and payroll. So, for instance, we've got a really good board at the moment. We've got a couple of employ tech guys on there. So the president is Ivan Brewer. He's got a great system that connects into a lot of your small to medium end platforms for shift time and attendance to help with calculating rosters and so on. And then you've got Damien Gooden, his system, which is HR Central. So they're primarily, interestingly, sit on the employment warehousing management side of it. They don't do payroll, but they'll connect into payroll. So they're our first 2 members for that division. So that any one of these, anyone at all, so whether you're SAP, any of these products that Julie and yourself would know, they can all join. And then being a properly structured and recognised peak body, which means we have to have a constitution, we have to be legally structured non-for-profit and so on. Government that says we recognise you as representing those members, welcome to the inner circle for developing policy before it comes out, or sitting on various different consultative panels, and that is a full-time job. And that's why you can't use anything that's proprietary limited, so privately owned company. You can't, because they only have their own for-profit interests. In addition to that, you can't have, so there's been a few consultation models set up where they're legally structured as not-for-profit, but all their directors are their own brands. They have almost no workforce. So, of course, if they rock up to those meetings with government, they're only interested in representing their own brand. So the point being is a properly structured peak body has to work on and for the industry. That's a cheesy line I've come up with on the webpage, because we have to educate both of these sectors on what we actually are. We work for and on those industries. We don't work in them.
Yeah.
Right? So that way we're not conflicted. And that's what it means to work with government. So yes, we lobby, but we don't lobby in the traditional political sense of left and right.
Right.
We lobby with them for our purpose, and our purpose is as a professional association, like your chartered accountants, your law societies, and so on. And that's where we're going to go to them with that an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, in and around developing standards. Now, all a standard is a guide. And when we surveyed the employed tech sector, including some of the backbones of their industry representation, which are the likes of Deanne Windsor and so on, is they've said it's incredibly important that we work with all governments to get a consistent interpretation for how we configure systems. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So I'll
Yep.
give you one example that's a hot topic. Now, we have met with several entities that we can't say publicly who they are, but people can probably guess within the government. They've said, yep, let us know when you've got a certain amount of members and we'll formally form a committee together.
Right.
But one is, say, the calculation of leave.
Ah, one of our favorite
What-
subjects here at the show.
It's all right. So let's say you're SAP. And I'm not saying
Yeah, yeah.
SAP is currently with us or not, but I'm just using it as an example because
Yep.
they're a monster. So let's say you're SAP. What is the exact coding formula put in for the accrual for annual leave? Now, a lot of people right now off the top of their head say, well, that's easy. That's so for most states and territories in Australia, you get 20 days annual leave per year. So it's 20 divided by 12, yada, yada, yada. Not necessarily, because you've got this thing called a leap year. Now, whether you're SAP or not, what if we had a position by the regulators? So the regulators are playing this space of primarily the Fair Work Ombudsman for the federal side of it. Then you've got your state regulators for other things that it may impact, including superannuation and taxation and so on. What if we had one configurable standard that said we all agree that the actual code is blah, 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 whatever the code is, right? So whatever the figure is. That's it. That's all a configurable standard is.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they go out, they go, oh, good, finally, we've got a direction here on something I've got a big question about. That's how we come into it. So we would develop, they'd be free, they'd be available on the internet. And the model we're using is not new. It already exists for the taxation side of the house and has for about 40 years. It's called the AASBs, Australian Accounting Standards Board. That's all they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. You guys are so. Can you bring this to America? Can you replicate? Would you think you could? Or no, but seriously, like, could you replicate this model? Like, after, if this is successful, and I can't imagine that even if you failed at part of it, it wouldn't still be a success, right? But like, could you
Yep.
replicate this model or do this
I-
again
I-
in other countries? I mean, if this works out,
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah. or show
Definitely.
other countries how to do this, right? And I don't know that the way we sort of operate legally here in America, like just from a what would you say, a capitalist perspective, that you're ever going to get all that cooperation. But really, like, just these standards and education and these things, I think, are just still lacking in every country, mostly.
I bet your
Yeah.
employed tech industry is probably loving the idea of configurable standards, because remember, we only have 9 governments. You
It
have
would
what,
make things easier,
52?
wouldn't it?
You have
Yeah.
52. I
Yeah.
read about certifications just for California. So
Oh,
um,
we have 16,000 entities if you count every local state, school tax, every little local there is across America. I think it's 15 to 16,000 if I'm not mistaken.
yeah,
That's insane, right? That's insane. That's the world. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost the
Yeah.
whole world. Like, come on. Yeah, we
Yep.
overcomplicate the hell out of things too here. But
But one thing,
yeah.
just related to what we're just talking about. So the accounting bodies have something already like that. They have
Yes.
an international accounting
Yes.
standards board. And I thought, well, if we get these standards, up and running, we start nailing them, start getting some traction in industry.
Yeah.
There's no reason why we can't start an international payroll standards board.
Yeah. Why not? Right? Yeah. No, I love it, man. I love it. I'm hoping you do it. I want to see it. So look, we got the education. You'll have now then the designation as a profession. You're going to benchmark them equal to accountants and lawyers. But there's one piece this is where I really want to opine, right? I love the idea of the Chief Payroll Officer, the CPO, right? And I like the idea that it is separate from the COO and CFO. I think there's something for that, right? Because we've seen some fraud, right? Where founders and CEOs did some things they weren't supposed to because they could control payroll. But you say you want to see it, that HR is subordinate to that. That, I think, is going to be controversial, particularly in America. I think it would, right? Could you see the CHRO reporting that way, right? I mean, Tell me
HR,
about that, right?
HR will hate it.
Yeah,
HR will
yeah.
hate
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
So let's just, we want to explain, well,
Yeah.
anyway, from my point of view, our position. We are going forward unapologetically about risk managing payroll.
I love that. And I agree with that. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
So that's where we're starting to come from. Now, as I said, I've got 2 HR degrees. I was a member of a well-known Australian HR institute, tried working with them, and did a lot of digging as to work out what is going on with HR. Why are they saying that they do payroll, but in actuality they don't? So I think, again, that analogy of 1815 Europe or 1806 and you've got Poland doesn't exist. It's technically a part of France, but of course it does. That's HR, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we came up with the narrative petitioning. It's being petitioned by HR. And for small business in Australia, which is a significant problem, when I was doing my research on what was causing non-compliance in around payroll, there's a taxation act called the TASA, Taxation Services Act, which means there's a heavily regulated by the Australian Taxation Office framework called a tax agent. And you've got to be a registered tax agent or registered BAS agent, business activity statement agent, in order to conduct any kind of tax return, including payroll or superannuation return, which means we have, for servicing 43% of the country, the wrong profession. Right? That is huge. When you go into the C-suite, it then goes the other way. And the question people always ask is, where should payroll sit? Should it sit under HR or accounting?
Yeah.
The answer unequivocally is neither. Because neither, and this is how we come at it, we've got several different layers as to why we say neither. Firstly, both of those professions are not qualified in payroll. We have a current gap, though. According to the skills framework we've got to do to get it recognised up, there isn't really one. But there is one that's closely linked to where we want to get it, which is those Masters of Labour laws in Metro Sydney and Melbourne. So we say it is an operational labour law profession, and HR is not qualified in it. Moreover, then we also bring lawyers into it and say lawyers also not qualified. And they go, what do you mean? We say, well, in their bachelor's degree, they don't even do a labour law unit. It's an elective. Most of them don't do it. And then they don't do it until they get to their practice certificate. And then they only get exposed to labour law education if they want to certify in it, which is optional, or do one of those 2 degrees.
Yeah.
Then you go back to accounting. Accounting is basically a bank. And accountants are going to hate this, but anyway, they're basically a bank. So, and if anything, what we found is accounting treatment contributes towards payroll non-compliance. It doesn't help it. So an example is an overpayment. When you get an overpayment, I've seen policies, and we've actually written this in some submissions, where they take administrative action on the victim of the overpayment who is not in control of their own payroll system, and the accountant then classified it as a debt and logged it as accounts receivable. Well, no. Firstly, you've got underpinning labour laws, and then you've got a whole bunch of compounding non-compliance as well, activity that happens in and around it that has to be examined. So that's where
Yeah.
payroll has to expand its capabilities into not only operational labour law, but things like fraud control and treatment and so on and so forth. And
Yeah.
then you've just got to keep up with it, keep up with your learnings and so on.
Yeah, I love the idea of the chief payroll officer, right? Especially being separate from the CFO or maybe even the CHRO. I totally with that. I think in my brain, but I'm just curious if you think that. I mean, Julie, what do you think? Do you think people will? I mean, Ciaran, do you see the CHRO reporting to the CPO then in that case, or who would they report to? How, or would they
So
all sort of report up to the same CEO?
this is how we tackle the
Yeah.
position is you can have whoever you want in the C-suite, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit there and say a CHRO shouldn't be in there. What
Yeah.
I'll say, though, categorically is neither the CRO or CFO is in charge of payroll.
I
They're
see.
not
Separate.
legally qualified.
Separate.
Yeah, exactly. They need to be separate. So what that leaves the CRO doing, and this is the problem we know happens in C-suite, is that it's a mixture of they can turn into a bit of a bear pit or / this is my train set. People get protective over it. And we're like, well, and as I've said in a couple of meetings with some international type entities that have pulled me in and said, we've got underpayment issues, what should we do? And I said, firstly, cancel your $200 a week helpline to a payroll service provider. And what are you paying your chief HR officer $400,000 a year for?
Yeah.
Because from what I can tell, they're not doing payroll. And secondly, they're really in charge of recruitment. Now, a lot of them, if they do their masters in HR, they should be strategic workforce management experts, but a lot of them aren't.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting.
So carve out whatever you want to do, but legally speaking, and particularly now that you've got a criminal element in and around payroll in Australia coming into effect next year,
I want to talk about that more. Yeah.
Yeah, the risk is just simply too high to not have an expert in charge. Now, what we're seeing though in the private sector, just so everyone's aware that this isn't the world according to Ciaran, and he's not off with He's not sitting there with a tinfoil hat on right now being crazy. The private sector wants that. En masse, the private sector wants a chief payroll officer.
Yeah.
Right.
And would that be at a certain
Why?
level of company, or do you see that as all
across
companies?
across the board. The feedback I'm having
Yeah.
unequivocally is please go ahead and do it. The problem we've got is how do you spot one?
Yeah.
Anyone can fake a CV. We know there's issues right now in Australia of kickback schemes for people faking their CVs, and they're going with at least credible, regulated professions, which payroll is not.
Mhm.
Accounting is credible and regulated.
Gotcha.
Lawyers are credible and regulated,
Payroll's not.
and payroll's not. So
Yeah.
we need to be able to firstly, and this is where we talk about regulated and credible. And in fact, when we launched the division, the motto which we came up with last is credible, capable, and empowered. Right. So credible
Gotcha.
means we're regulating, and we will be doing criminal history background checks. Through to you'll only get certified once you've done a degree. The degree framework will be dependent on how much experience you've got, and then we're going to certified and then empowered. So people should be able to then go to a register just like you can in any law society or state bar in Australia. You've got an open register of practitioners. We'll have that, and so on and so forth.
Gotcha.
And then they've got to know what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So if you
So certified and educated, right? They're going to have to be able to prove that.
exactly,
Yeah.
and this is controversial. What I'm about to say here to anyone listening from Australia is I
Yeah.
would say there's not one qualified payroll person in Australia right now. So you've got people
Wow.
in Australia that are brilliant in certain aspects, but that's because they've had to learn on the job. So you might have someone with 40 years experience that's fantastic at modern awards, but they've never done an employment termination payment, which is incredibly complicated, particularly if you've got to go in arrears and you've got to tie in several different acts,
Yeah.
right?
Wow. Julie, what do
And
you
so
think
on.
about all this?
What does it really take to lead with impact in today's ever evolving world? Welcome to Inside the C Suite, the podcast where influence, energy, innovation, and empathy converge. Hi, I'm Christy Honeycutt, your host. Join me as I sit down with the boldest voices in leadership, visionaries who are not just making decisions, but making a difference. In every episode, we explore the heart of leadership. How do high performing leaders harness their energy? How do they lead with empathy without losing their edge? How do they turn disruption into innovation and pressure into purpose? You'll hear unfiltered stories of adversity, resilience, and the raw moments that shaped true influence. This isn't about perfection. It's about presence, passion, and the energetic exchange that fuels transformation. Inside the C Suite is your invitation to lead from a deeper place with intention, connection, and courage. If you're ready to go beyond the surface and unlock what really moves leaders to action, hit subscribe and step inside. You can find us wherever you get your podcast fix. Inside the C Suite, well, we're an energetic exchange. Let's lead with influence, live with energy, and create with empathy.
You know, I'm first of all, I just think this is amazing to approach looking at payroll as its own profession by um, by saying we know this is going to piss off the accountants and we know this is going to tick off HR, but like the facts are the facts, and here's what we're finding. So I think, but I don't think you're wrong about any of that. It makes me think also a little bit of, at least in the U.S., there's parts of the benefits world that are so closely linked to the labor laws and just the legislation that fiduciary responsibility comes into play, and it's kind of more highly tied to the lawyers and the accountants than payroll has been. And maybe the time has come, right, where folks realize that even in the US market we have some similarities, and a part of our activity that is acknowledged as having those close ties that payroll just doesn't have that same stature, right?
Yeah. You know what I'll add to that, Julie, just here before you speak on this, Ciaran, is number one, I would say HR doesn't get the CFO haul down in handcuffs. The payroll
Yeah.
manager, the payroll leader does. And often payroll knows more about what's going on in the organization than HR even does. And I think the separation is a really good thing, because there's been a lot of fraud. I've seen some fraud recently in the news, smaller companies, but people manipulating payroll through I'm the CFO, do what I say. I'm the CEO, do what I say. And I think there is a danger in that, especially I mean, there's a lot of fraud that can happen in payroll. It's the biggest hit to the P&L, right? So
And there's
yeah,
there's much wider risks that are
yeah,
unawares. I actually did a post this morning on so there was a $1.1 million payroll fraud that's just the person just got convicted.
yeah,
Now, what I did was I wrote some stats because I love reading ACFI's report to the nations and reminding everyone payroll's in the top 10 risks, and it has been for 20 years. I've been reading that report since it first came out.
yeah,
And the typical fraud happens over 18 months. That's if you've got detection capabilities. If you don't, it's several years, and it basically triples. I think the stats was the average payroll fraud's about 200,000 US,
yeah,
and then it shoots up to 4 to 6. So then when you talking modern context terms of wage theft, you've now got criminal prosecution and so on in Australia, and then you've got things that aren't making it out to mainstream that we're aware of as a part of our research that we're going to put into risk management assessments that we're going to be producing. And this is a part of building the capability and empowering payroll professions, because they'll have this risk report from us that's going to be the most expansive one around. So we'll have at least 3 to 4 data points, where the current data points for payroll fraud in Australia is only one. They're only using the Fair Work Ombudsman's research, which is great, by the way, but we need to include other things such as class action litigation, wider fraud reports such as ACFI. But one of the things, for instance, internally that we're hearing from payroll is an accidental underpayment that's detected, and the COO or CFO/CEO goes, let's not tell anyone about this because I've got 3 years of bonuses to pick up. So what we are then recommending is, as we push into the C-suite with guides, we'll say we recommend that all employment contracts for C-suite void bonuses to executives should it come out later that they are aware of an underpayment. And then that's why we have to have regulated payroll practitioners involved. So under their code of ethics, they say, sorry, sir, but
yeah,
by and by, you have to report this. I have a ethical obligation, and in turn, the C-suite should also be holding them checks saying, if you declare this 3 years later from now, we're going to pull those 3 years of bonuses. Guarantee you no one at all will be talking about what I've just mentioned then, and this won't come out for another 3 to 4 years as we start
yeah.
to push into this space.
I mean, just speaking of de-risking, I mean, Julie, I've seen over the last 10 years in some of the big companies where some of their shared service centers for finance were requiring director and above to have CPAs.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's common, but anecdotally, I noticed that. So I think it's getting more controlling, if you will, just because of all the fraud possibilities and trouble people can get into, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say there's probably a whole realignment, in our current culture around where do you need the higher level education, and where
Yeah.
have you pushed it, and maybe it's really not as critical. And I'm not sure. I'm sure we have quite a bit of work to do in that space.
Yeah. So, Ciaran, one of the things that I've picked up on being out kind of traveling and speaking to people from Australia who are practitioners is a bit of anxiety and concern over this new law around criminality for payroll fraud, right? That I know there's some new law you can probably explain better than I can, but what is that going to do to the talent pool, the current and future talent pool, if people are thinking, hey, I don't know that I want to be criminally responsible for the entire thing anymore. There's one thing about being career responsible for a payroll, and there's another thing being criminally responsible. And what is it going to do maybe for managed services? Are we going to see more outsourcing maybe in Australia because we're already having a talent drop, right? So does this escalate that, or do you think there's going to be some sort of balance here?
So what we're seeing, and when you guys go and look at that amazing infographic ANSCO survey that
Yeah.
we did, we looked at as many, looked around to involve as many data sources as we could for that survey on what payroll's actually doing. So that survey was run about a year ago now, and I connected up with some terrific payroll recruitment experts, and I've kept in touch with them. So they only, for instance, these guys that were involved in the survey only recruit for the payroll industry and no other industry. And the reason being is they agree with a lot of our findings, including education, skilling. So one of the problems you've got in Australia right now is they're writing, you must have a HR, business, accounting or law degree to work in payroll. All these guys unequivocally make their employers who advertise with them remove that. There is no qualification as far as we're concerned until we develop it, and so on and so forth. Now, in relation to your question, and I've been keeping contact with these guys, talking about what's going on currently in the market. The exact opposite has happened, Pete.
Really? Okay.
Wow.
Good.
Payroll has gone through the roof.
People
Money's
wanting to
gone
be
up.
in talent coming in.
employers wanting to risk manage wage theft is driving the increase.
Oh,
So
I see. Okay.
what's happening is they're
More
now
job
advertising.
openings.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
It's increased market demand is the one liner. Now,
Gotcha.
that's where they've come to us and said, please help and hurry up with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because we, so one very concerned and very credible recruitment payroll industry guy from Victoria has told me twice about fraudulent CV kickback schemes going on.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So they're quite significant because what's happening is they're using legitimate, credible professionals. So you're talking accounting and law qualified people,
Yeah.
faking their CVs,
Oh.
and then taking a permanent percentage of their pay to act as a fake referee.
Oh, great. Great.
Right, so
Nice.
it's
Good
just
for them.
ironic.
Wow.
That's fun.
It's just ironic that this is being driven by the criminalisation
Oh
of.
man. But I mean,
of
have you
wage theft.
experienced that? I've talked to some, and what do you guys call that law? I apologize. I probably flubbed over it.
It was passed as the bill was called Closing the Loopholes Bill, and it was
Okay.
what they call an omnibus bill. Omnibus bill means it had many different acts in it,
Yes.
and in there was wage theft. Now,
Explain
just
that though,
so-
because what can happen? Because what I was told was that the payroll manager or leader could actually be criminally held responsible for a fraud in payroll, and that's where I
Yeah.
think I've heard some practitioners saying, "I don't know that I want that much I'm happy to be responsible, but I don't know that I want to go to prison for something that I might not be able to stop." Things
So
happen,
when-
right?
when-
I mean, yeah,
Yeah, when this comes up, the first thing I say to payroll is, well, you can already go to prison for what you do.
possibly,
anyway.
right? Yeah, taxes and yeah.
Well, taxes, but I mean, just simply this news article I was reading just before we jumped on air, $1.1 million fraud was a payroll person,
Yeah.
defrauding the company. Now, what they're talking about, though, specifically into this act, and by the way, it's not the first act. There was 2 state ones put through for the Queensland and Victorian governments already. What happened was it's because you had Labor governments in state power for many years, but it was a coalition or like a Republican type federal government who wouldn't do it. So the state governments acted on their own. Now, WA, a third one, also modified their industrial relations laws to kind of include it, although it wasn't specifically called a wage theft act. So federally, when Labor got in, so I think Democrats got in about 18 months ago, one of their election promises was to criminalise it. Now, they're providing several different clauses in there, from safe harbour through to exemption. So that's the first thing. So small businesses has an exemption provided they follow a code. Right now, small business is about 43% of the employed economy. So small business can breathe a sigh of relief, provided they can show they're doing something. So remember, this is a criminal type burden of proof, which means they have to demonstrate intent before the various different bodies will prosecute. The primarily one being the Fair Work Ombudsman. Now, there's a Deputy Fair Work Ombudsman who's terrific, and she's in charge of this, called Michelle Carey. And her and I will be chatting more in due course, provided, obviously we reach our milestones and we officially are recognised by the government and so on, to provide clarity in and around the circumstances and the role payroll can play. Now, what they're talking about where payroll can potentially be prosecuted is if, let's say, there's intent and they've then decided to defraud and deliberately underpay and so on and so forth. So like all criminal prosecutions, there's a huge amount of boxes that need to be ticked for that to be confirmed.
Yeah.
But yes, payroll is on the hook, as it should be, and I think it will be sorting out the intermediaries that like to say they're in charge of payroll versus the ones that are competent and actually in charge of it. And I've actually been chatting to some top payroll people recently who will only take a job if they're reporting direct to the CEO.
Yeah, that's great.
So-
Do you think this will drive up managed services any more than it already is? I mean, we're already seeing a good bit of outsourcing for various compliance things and just transformation, but do you think it'll push that up a little bit?
Managed services have already been a long-standing issue in Australia because of
Interesting.
state payroll tax.
Yeah.
So that's where you're over a certain amount of employees. Now, I can't remember the figure. It's something like 200, 300 or 400, something like that.
Yep.
You then have to pay a state tax for the privilege of that amount of employees working in your state or territory. Now, because of that, a lot of particularly the bigger entities, so particularly entities in our top 50 ASX listed, so that's the most wealthy companies in Australia, have managed services in the Philippines. Philippines is very popular, and so on. That in unto itself creates a risk, and I think the wage theft bill unintentionally may have wandered into that.
Yeah.
And I
Interesting.
say that because what is the expectation of someone And you've heard everything that we're laying down the framework right now over the next couple of years. Credible, empowered, regulated payroll. How's that going to work for someone working offshore?
Yeah, or even in country. I mean, do you think it'll drive up going to single, sort of single country in country providers at all, or to get
I think
help?
I think it should, but I think
Yeah,
it's going to be a long process as to
yeah,
breaking that up within
yeah,
the market. So, for instance, where we're going with the TASA Act, so that Tax Agent Services Act, we're going to do what the lawyers did. And once we show that we're at a very high standard for self-regulation, we've got a degree in place and so on. And by the way, with that postgraduate degree, in case anyone out there is panicking, you won't have to do an undergraduate. If you've got 5 years experience, you'll
yeah,
be able to roll straight in. And so once we do that, we can then get an exemption. So what that means is there might be an explosion of payroll being recognised both in remediation as well as advertising their services. Whereas in what happens right now is a lot of them have to go and study
yeah,
bookkeeping to get their BAS license, which is the equivalent of, like, think if you're a mechanic, you have to go study
yeah.
how to,
Table stakes, sort of. Yeah,
yeah, exactly, how to study how to be
yeah,
a waiter or something instead. So
yeah.
I think there'll be various different explosions and a return back to Australia.
Well, very cool, man. I'm excited. All of this is so very exciting, and I love what you're doing. I hope we can see it shared with others. What you've learned and what you guys structure this as, and what it becomes. But tell me, just high level, what's your timeline for this, and sort of, I guess, how can our audience help? What can we do? We've got a lot of payroll practitioners listening, maybe some from Australia. I know we got some Australians out there. So, what can we do to help?
Yeah, certainly. So timeline-wise, I've got some fantastic timelines, and we've never achieved one thing.
Yeah,
so, so I channel George Martin, Game of Thrones order,
yeah,
and I just say to be ready when it's ready. So what we're working on, though, is we actually are in a cusp of a very important transitional change of moving from a purely volunteer organisation to
yeah.
a proper paid structure body, which means we need people to join, and we're going to be rolling out in the next 1 to 2 months the first member division, and that'll be for payroll. So for all intents and purposes, while it's called a division, it will be its own association.
Very cool.
And please join. Yeah,
Yeah.
the best way you can support us is join. Yeah, you can follow us on LinkedIn, Australian Workforce Compliance Council, or on our website, awcc.asn.au. So everything's announced on there. We announce stuff pretty much weekly, including our submissions to government. Sorry, Julie.
Yeah, so you don't need to be in Australia to register and become a member.
That's right. And anyone can join. So whilst we are, as we said, we have a very firm point for what we call intermediary, so anyone that's not payroll, you can join as an affiliate. That's fine. And we know that there is a huge thirst for knowledge around what we're doing from HR and from accounting, because they ask all the time, and their professional bodies are not interested. That's why we created the affiliate category. So anyone from HR accounting, you can join. It's the same price. We yet to announce the prices, but they're quite reasonable. And anyone with a payroll background. When we get to rolling out the certification, that's when everyone from payroll that's a member will have to convert or revert to an affiliate membership, but that's several years away.
Yeah. Wow. I'm excited for you. I can't wait. And look, if there's anything we can do to help you, you just let us know. I'd love to work closer with you, Ciaran, to see how I can contribute maybe some of my research, or if I can come speak, or whatever we can do to help. And I want to bring you back in another year, maybe 2, whatever makes sense. And let's talk about all the great things that are coming out of the AWCC for payroll. So thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate you.
Not a problem, and we'd love to have you guys on too. We'll be running events and podcasts in due course, and of course we'll be pushing into a news website and so on. So, and thank you very much for having me. It's been great to be on. I was very excited after looking at some of your previous episodes.
Yeah, great, man. I'm happy to share the message, and we're happy to shine a light on some good work that's going on, and maybe we can maybe this can become a model, right? A standard for what could be for payroll around the world. I hope so. Thank you for coming. So. All right. Well, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much, Julie. Good seeing you as always.
Thanks.
And we will be back soon, people. Take care.